Welcome into the Odds and Audibles podcast. Jared Mack, Erik Skopil on the podcast. I'm Matt
Oh,
Prehm.
ooh.
Welcome to your Friday edition of the show. Our first podcast that we have recorded since the start of spring football practice. We were able to go into Thursday morning, very cold, very crisp Thursday spring practice. We watched about 25, 30 minutes of practice. A lot of that included stretching, warming up. Didn't see really any 11 on 11 that we could mention on the podcast. We did see some team stuff, but we weren't technically supposed to be in there. So we won't divulge into that. But there's nonetheless, we learned a lot of information. It was an opportunity to get our eyes on some new coaches. It was an opportunity for us to get our eyes on some newcomers, whether that's a transfer or whether that's a high school or junior college edition. And then we also were able to, we said this on the show, like on Wednesday, that there's always going to be some guys that we show up and they're just not there. And that happened on Thursday with a couple guys. They are no longer with the program for various reasons. Erik, do you want to run through the two guys that are no longer with the team?
Yeah, and probably neither's a huge surprise, to be honest, but Michael Afayese, probably, by the way, the best pronunciation I've ever had. It's maybe the last time we'll mention him on a podcast.
Yeah.
So, he is medically retired, no longer on the roster. Dan confirmed following practice. We should note we did speak with Dan for about, I think it was like 11 minutes after practice. So we'll have some thoughts there. And there's a lot of content up on the site, including a full transcript and video. If you haven't seen that, go check it out. But yeah, no, he medically retired. I don't think that was unexpected. He didn't play at all last season. This would have been his fourth year in the program, and he'd played, I think it was 21 or 22 total reps in 3 years. So a guy who never really got an opportunity, and now his career, at least at Oregon, is over. I had some people ask questions about is he done with football? Well, I don't know exactly what the injury is, but he could, in theory, transfer somewhere else and play there. Medically retiring at one school just basically eliminates your takes you off the scholarship count. Oregon now is at 91. I think that's notable. But it doesn't preclude him from taking off and transferring to another school. Thomas Tyner, notably, I think medically retired in 2015 and then played at Oregon State in, I want to say, 16 or 17.
They've got to get medical clearance from the next school that he would play.
Right. Yeah, if he even wants to go that route, and it's very, very possible that whatever he's dealing with is significant enough that it's just the time for him to focus on other things. So he's not here. I don't know if that's a big hit, to be honest. I don't think you really expected him to play much of a role, but you feel for a kid who has to hang up the cleats, maybe against his own wishes. And then Alex Bales, who was one of the players who punted last season, infamously against Oregon State. Well, I was going to say infamous. Yeah. I paused because people remember him from Oregon State, which was probably the total low point of special teams since maybe the Utah game in 2015 when Utah returned a punt for a touchdown. There are a couple of other weird things that happened. Like it was just a really bad special teams game that really cost Oregon. Bales is not with the team, and I don't know if that's a huge surprise because I think it was pretty clear he wasn't going to win a starting job anywhere. He was not on scholarship to begin with, so we'll see where his career takes him. I don't know if it's been confirmed one way or another if he is trying to play football. I know our good friend James Krepke of the Oregonian said he had spoken to Alex at some point yesterday, and it just confirmed he wasn't playing at Oregon. I don't know if he has more information, but those are the two players not on the roster. And again, I don't think huge pieces of news, but important to start the show kind of addressing people who aren't with the program anymore.
Now, the additions, there's a lot. We counted 25, 26.
26 was Nate Kruger, the Oregon SID's official count, and I have confirmed that as best as my counting skills, which are, again, very elementary, that 26 looks to be correct.
Yeah, that means every transfer that Oregon signed, except for Tashim Johnson, they are on campus, they are enrolled, they are part of the program. They're taking part in spring football. And then over half of the high school prospects that Oregon, or the junior college prospects, we should note, that Oregon signed are also on campus. So you've got about 2/3 of your recruiting class already in town, already taking part in spring football. Now, we should note there are a couple guys who are limited or who are just straight up hurt and are not full participants. Junior Angelau, the 4-star transfer from Texas, interior offensive lineman, did not take part in practice. He's rehabbing. Janoris Wilson, a high school offensive lineman, he is doing some kind of rehab and is not a full participant as well. So you are seeing a couple of newcomers not go through drills yet, which it's March 17th. This is nothing really to freak out about, but it's still noteworthy. I will say there was one guy that, you know, we all were watching the team run through the walkway into practice. There was one guy that I was just like very just impressed with just his physical attributes, and that's Tatum Tuioti. Both Erik, you and I both, we saw him run by us and we were like, whoa, that guy's bigger than your typical freshman. He's bigger than what we were thinking he would be.
I think the reason I reacted to that, and maybe you did, is we'd seen him in person at Sheldon not that long ago, and he certainly added some bulk. So I don't know how much he plays a role early, but gosh, like you'd love to see a kid show up and be physically put together enough where you could envision a world where they could contribute. I don't probably expect that happens, but no, I'm in agreement. Local kid, I mean, kind of local, but at least finished his high school career at Sheldon. Son of the defensive line coach, going to be playing edge. He confirmed to me when he committed that it was Tosh Lupoy who was his position coach, not his dad, which is probably good and bad, maybe. I don't know. But that's certainly a notable name. And you know, I think in general, a lot of the freshmen looked good. I think the one that you looked at walking through and said, that looks like a freshman, was probably Austin Novazad, the quarterback, who kind of was the expectation going in. Pretty slim guy. But no, I think in general, I guess there's one more injury to note, and we should also acknowledge it's first day, so it's hard to get a total feel for attendance, which we tried our best to take. But I would say, Jared, you probably agree, probably kind of a mixed bag. Probably not as good in the past, but Iapani Lalalu butchered that one. Feope's younger brother. I call him Pancho. Makes it easier on me. He was also a partial from what I saw, and it looked like he was rehabbing something. So some of the new offensive linemen are going through things. But I don't know, Jared. Another positive here, and I'll toss it to you for this, is Justin Jacobs, who we were very much uncertain if what his role would be or kind of where he was health-wise, just kind of walked into practice like the rest of them. And from what we could see, it looked like he was close to a full participant, at least from what we saw.
Yeah, no, it was very nice to see him. Again, we only saw 18 minutes of practice, which was 12 minutes of stretching, and then 2 periods of 3 minutes that were, one was special teams that, as we've talked about ad nauseum on this podcast before, isn't the most exciting. And the other was a stumble bun drill where guys are going at 50% effort because it's, you know, the first day of spring camp. So
we should note they're not in pads too. Like that's obvious.
Not
probably
in pads,
for some people.
not in spider pads either. Yeah. Just like straight nothing. Like Luke Basso looked like a child out there without his pads on. It was very funny. He's a smaller guy than what you'd expect when he has his pads. But yeah, Justin Jacobs, it was good to see him out there. I'm not sure where he is physically because, again, we didn't see anything where anybody really was showing off their physicality or their speed or anything like that. But just to see him out there on the field, I thought was a positive development. You know, guys like Jordan Birch, all the offensive linemen except for the aforementioned Junior Aguilar, somebody like George Silva who came in. I know he's a freshman, and I was more talking about transfers, or he's a junior college guy. He was physically impressive as well. I thought he was one of the bigger guys on the team, or at least on the offensive line. Tez Johnson was there, probably bigger than what I had anticipated.
Was he? I thought he was like a child. Just thought he was like the smallest guy.
I mean, 5'10", 150 pounds. I mean, it's hard to be much smaller than that. But, you know, I thought he looked comparable to what Chris Hudson looks like out there, which, again, is a smaller dude on the field. But with the way that some people have been talking about it, makes him sound like he's literally a child, like Erik was mentioning. But no, I thought he looked fine.
I just want to clarify. He is very slight of build though. Like he is not.
Yeah, of course. But yeah.
Well,
5'10", 150 pounds.
Yeah, but we're the ones who were. I'm just trying to give the fans who haven't been able to see these people in person an opportunity to kind of like what our initial like. You think he was bigger? He was one of the first people I saw walk in, and I was like, wow, it does not look like a very well put together human being. And that was before we got the rosters. Then I was like, oh, that makes a ton of sense. That's Tez Johnson.
Right. I guess, yeah, maybe it was helpful that I knew who 15 was before seeing him. I'm like, oh, there's Tez. That's what I expect him to look like, maybe a little bit bigger. But I digress. Anyways, there was special teams I thought was probably the highlight of the practice, other than, I guess, watching guys walk into the practice and seeing how they look physically or how they've performed over the offseason. And by highlight of the practice, I mean Luke Dunn, our punter.
I was just going to say.
Yeah, we're getting there.
You wanted to know what Luke Dunn kick looks like. You watched a lot of them. I saw 2, and I was quite impressed.
Yeah, I saw probably 6 of them, 5 or 6 of them. He and Ross James were the 2 punters back there. Luke Basso was one of the long snappers, along with Nick Dzansky, a freshman long snapper who was a 5-star, quote unquote, for those not watching. 5-star long snapper. We're, not sure what those rankings are, but they're not 24/7's rankings. But anyways, Ross James and Luke Dunn, who we asked Nate, the SID, how to pronounce his name. He said Dunn. We're saying Dunn now. So it's all done. Anyways, they were good punts. They were good punts. I thought Luke's best punts were significantly better than James's best punts. And again, first day of spring practice, can't make too much of it. Both of them royally messed up at points. Just had some bad kicks out there. It kind of happens, but I will say when Luke ran into one, it was a better product than James's was. It was higher, it was longer, somehow a really tight spiral and kind of like knuckleball through the air. It was very impressive. It was like some of the best punts I've seen on the football field, or at least that back practice field, since Blake Lemoine, like in 2019. So the blast from the past, but that's what Oregon needs. They haven't had Tom Snee was a fine punter, don't get me wrong, but he wasn't above average, but he was what they needed. And, we go back to last year, how Erik began this with Bales and the aforementioned Oregon State game. Mm-hmm. Oregon needs a guy who they can rely on out there. Even if he's just slightly above average, that's significantly better than what they had last season.
Jared, did you get the average hang time and distance?
No, absolutely not.
We joked about it. That's all.
We can get Dan on that. We can get Dan on that because they
I'll
had
ask Dan about Luke.
3 guys.
That's fine by me.
They are tracking.
They had 3 guys all with stopwatches clocking every single one. 3 of them. Every punt. So they've got that data. I'm sure if we ask, we could.
We're not going to get that data. No. That'll be
maybe if we ask nicely.
That brings me back to the Mario Cristobal approach, where we'd ask him a thing and said, "Yeah,
I'll get that to you."
Yeah, I'll make sure to get that to you, and then we never got anything he ever promised us. So yeah, that might be maybe Dan will steal a quote from Mario and be like, "Yeah, no, I'll get you that. I don't have it off the top of my head, but I'll get you that punt data," and then we'll ask 8 months later. And no, I of course not.
I forgot about it when I left the press conference. Overall, though, it was. Look, we like Jared said, we were in there for about 20 minutes. We couldn't necessarily tell too much if the logistics of practice was going as crisp as they wanted to. We didn't hear a lot of hey, pick it up, type of stuff from Dan on the mic. There was definitely a lot of reminders from multiple coaches of proper technique or explaining why they're doing this now, type thing. But that's a pretty normal occurrence. Dan did speak though about how after practice, he did speak about practice is a little bit different this season, he says. But I kind of remember him saying a lot of the stuff last year, but they're able to run, double the people per drill because they've got coaches. They've got more coaches. They've got more practice room. They've tweaked a couple things where instead if they're running 11 on air, they're able to do 22, guys on offense running the same drill at the same time. Or if they're doing 11 on 11, they're able to do 2 units of that during spring football. I don't know if that's in part because last spring it was so new, or if they've got new coaches, or if they've tweaked some things, or if it's all of it. But I do remember him talking about that a lot during fall camp and during the season. But nonetheless, like, he was very, very high on the coaching additions that they made, very high on the analyst additions that they've made, and the impacts that it will have from getting just more reps during spring football.
Yeah, I felt like what I saw on, and there's two practice fields, and the one I was watching during the special teams drill, and I'm curious, Jared, did the special teams, is that pretty much reminiscent of what we saw last fall and spring in terms of the way it was constructed?
It was exactly the same.
Because what was going on my field, and it's notable because we had two new position coaches. Will Stein was working with quarterbacks, Erik Terry working with offensive line. Makes sense. Those guys aren't working on special teams because almost none of those guys are going to play much special teams aside from extra points and field goals, which of course they're not really working on that. They're working on return stuff typically. But it was notable that those two coaches had a little bit of different, I would say, approaches to what they were doing, at least from a drill perspective. Again, we get to watch 2-3 minute periods. So I was kind of glued over here. Jared was on special teams. Matt was kind of jumping back in between, shooting photos along with Craig, our the photographer. And I just thought it was notable, a little bit, small shifts. I won't pretend like I could name the drills they were running or everything they were trying to get out of it, but Clem and Terry in particular, I think, have different ways of getting their guys ready to start a day. And I'd be curious to hear how different some of the technical stuff gets, because I remember a year ago talking with Ryan Walk and Alex Forsyth and TJ Bass and some of those guys about some of the technical changes that were made under Clem from what Cristobal and Mirabal had done. Well, Erik Terry kind of comes from the Mirabal Cristobal coaching tree. He spent 2 years working with them prior to taking off for a couple of years at Hawaii and then with the Vikings. I wonder if some of the technique will, and again, this is something I don't have an answer to. I don't think it means a ton based upon the first two drills they're doing, because none of that's really technical. They're literally working on getting out of their stances and sliding and pass protection for one, and the other one was working on hand stuff. Like, I don't know if there's a ton to take away from that. But I will be curious, talking with Terry and some of the offensive line later in spring, of technically, are we shifting back to some of the stuff we saw under Cristobal, or is it a combination of both, or kind of what's Terry's approach? Because I think that's something that is somewhat notable. And then on the Stein part, it didn't feel drastically different because essentially they're just getting warmed up. So eventually they break into long toss. But I did think it was notable that, and again, it might be just first day. You had a true freshman in Novosad there in his first college practice, but Stein spent, I would say, a lot more time teaching than what we saw from Dillingham, especially in the season, and working on footwork. And again, that could just be day one, making sure everybody's got a good feel for how he likes things done. Probably is that. But I just thought it definitely wasn't identical to what we saw under Dillingham in the first period. And then the second period was they went and broke off into the stumble bum drill and took part in some of that. So, but I think in general, we saw some small deviations, but for the most part, as Matt said, I think a lot of it was similar. Probably some things that they've taken and recalibrated over the off season, obviously. And I know Gan said after practice, this was a really good day one.
He also said that he's never been somewhere where day one wasn't always good. So
true. He also said that.
Yeah. I mean, it's day one. I mean, like we've all said, there wasn't a lot to watch. We took in as much as we could during the time periods that we did watch. As I said, the special teams drills were basically like 100% the same. I will say, like, I guess specifically from those special teams drills, I know I got into to punting, which was, I think, probably the biggest storyline. But there were guys returning those punts. I think that's an important little thing to put in there. Troy Franklin, Tez Johnson, Cole Martin, and Chris Hudson were guys back there returning punts. So Troy Franklin, towards the end of last season, was beginning to return punts. That punt returner role kind of flip-flopped. Josh Delgado was back there. Chris Hudson was back there. Troy Franklin was back there. It all kind of switched around towards the end of last season. I think Oregon was trying to find an answer there, and we'll see where Franklin lies and towards like the regular season, where I don't know if they'll have him back there back there returning punts, just because he's too valuable of an asset to be a punt returner, especially if he gets hurt on that, then you lose your number one receiver. So we'll see who it might be. I thought it was interesting that Cole Martin was back there. True cornerback, but one of the few defensive players. Last year they didn't have The only defensive player was Christian Gonzalez, who ever fielded a punt during practice. And
I think Darren Barkin's in the spring.
He was kickoff returns.
Was a kickoff? I just knew he was doing. Yeah. He was back a little bit. Yeah.
He was kickoff returns, and Gonzalez at one point fielded punts, and it was like, okay, I know you're never going to use him because again, the too valuable trait. But and as for kickoff returns, they just used the kick machine. Grant Meters and Camden Lewis were off practicing kick coverage returns with the middle portion of the kick return unit. So guys like Patrick Herbert and Jake Shipley, just the blockers, Mace Funa, guys like that. Kenyon Sadiq was out there with some of those groups as well. But the kick returners off the machine were all running back. So it was Noah Whittington, Jordan James, Bucky Irving. I don't have the list in front of me, but Dante Dowdell, I think, was out there. And then maybe Jaden Lamar off the top of my head, which makes sense because that's what Oregon did for the meantime last year towards the end of the season, especially in the Holiday Bowl. But that was those special teams for you. Some good energy from the coaching staff, making sure everybody is consistent on each single rep. But yeah, no Carson Battles anymore, which I thought was strange. But it's just weird.
Forsyth, which was strange.
I was going to say that was one of the things that was strange. Some of these mainstays like Forsyth and Walk and McCormick, guys who've just been here for. Like McCormick basically predates Jared's time at the university. So like
we enrolled in the same year.
Yeah. So the fact that, and now Jared's a couple of years removed from graduation, that kind of speaks to these guys were here for a really long time. So that was one of the things I picked up on too, guys, was just kind of weird not seeing Alex Forsyth or Ryan Walk or some of these offensive linemen, or like I said, Cam McCormick and some guys on defense who've just been here forever. Just first day of spring, you're always kind of like, some guys are gone that we've seen a lot of, and that's just kind of weird. But ultimately, team will be better probably going forward. Not because they're poor players, but the team will be better for just kind of developing guys without them.
Still got Dorless.
Let's take. That's true. Dorless is still here. Let's take a quick break, and we come back. We've got some position change talk. We've got some number change. And we'll also dive into just some things that we thought stood out that maybe we didn't divulge in any of the content we put up on duckterritory.com yesterday. All right, welcome back to the Odds and Audibles podcast. There was definitely some discussion towards the tail end, speaking with Dan, just about maybe some position versatility and some position changes, and Jamal Hill, his name was brought up about possibly moving from nickel safety hybrid type role that he's played the last couple of seasons under two different coaching staffs to a linebacker role with Oregon. The quote that Dan says is, I think position versatility for all our guys. I think everybody here knows what we want to try guys in multiple positions. If we can be our best team with Jamal at linebacker, we're going to work Jamal in at that position. He's not going to give away trade secrets, as he put it, if they're going to truly do this or not. But I think it's an interesting concept. It's a position that doesn't have a lot of depth. Jamal Hill is a physical player, and it could maybe allow some of your best players on defense to get all on the field at the same time.
Yeah, I'd like to see it in practice before really assessing if it works. And
Sure.
Of course, I'm sure that's exactly what the coaching staff is doing right now by having him spend a little time there just to see if it works. I will say, like, some of the traits make sense if you're going to compare him to a Jeffrey Bassa. Like, physically, they're not too far off. And I thought both Bassa, we should mention, and Hill, I think probably added some weight. Again, we don't have roster updates from a weight perspective. We won't get that. Maybe in spring, maybe we'll get it in fall. I have no idea. Maybe we'll get it game one. I don't know. They've been kind of weird about heights and weights. And it is one of the things that I know the coaching staff is always kind of like, I don't know why the fans care so much, but we do. And we'd like to know who's added weight, but I digress on that one. But no, I think, there's a couple, this could be a really positive thing if it works out. If you just kind of think about, it from a couple different angles, because what is the issue they had last year at safety? Some of the issues they had was a lack of speed. And I don't want to say that was all Jamal Hill, but I think at times he maybe was a step slow getting to places. Well, you put him in a different position where, he's not having to cover as much ground, and maybe that's not as much of an issue. He's always been a fairly shorter tackler. Again, built similar to Jeffrey Vasa. Again, I think last year he was listed at maybe 5'11", about 210 pounds, somewhere like that, maybe 6 feet.
I just looked it up. It was 6'1", 211.
Okay, yeah. So I knew it was about 210 pounds. That's pretty similar to what Bassa weighed. Those two are comparable.
Would you like to know what Bassa
weighed? I think Bassa was 212 last year.
Yeah, 6'2", 212.
Yeah, so they're pretty similar in size. So it makes sense. And again, and then the other part here is I mentioned how maybe he was, having issues at the back end at safety. Well, by removing him and theoretically moving him to linebacker, that would allow some of that safety stuff to kind of play itself out. Because we've talked about there's only too many cooks in the kitchen there. Well, maybe you move Hill to linebacker, and that allows Addison to step up. That allows Evan Williams to step up. That allows Steve Stevens to step up. Maybe some other guys that are some of the younger developmental players. So I think there could be a real positive here. But of course, as Dan said, I don't think anything is set in stone, and I'm sure they'll get through spring and make a decision, just because a year ago, think about where Tricrest Bridges was playing, and he was playing safety. Jared was all on the Bridges Addison safety train. Ended up he was playing a different spot. I think I don't argue. I think there was something there. We're probably never going to get to see it, but no, this is the time of year to experiment. Another player he mentioned that was doing a little bit of that, but it was Sir Mel's, who we should note. There was a photo that surfaced a couple weeks ago of him in a white offensive line uniform. He was on defense, at least on Thursday. And again, Lanning was asked about Mel's, and he said, we're going to work guys in multiple positions. That was the end of that quote. So not a whole lot more to go off of, but this is the time of year to be doing that stuff. And it makes, I think Jamal Hill thing, we hadn't thought of that possibility. Could work. We'll see.
Yeah, I'll be interested to see what it looks like on the field. Like you said, Jamal is a very similar physique to Jeffrey Bassa. We went through the numbers just a bit ago. And like you said, Erik, both he and Bassa came into camp, at least visually, very obvious, they added weight. And for Hill, I was kind of surprised about that. I remember I think I just said to myself, wow, he looks huge this year. And maybe that's because of he's transitioning to linebacker. I don't know where he plays for linebacker, meaning is he lining up with Bassa? Is he lining up next to Jacobs? Right. Because Jacobs is the bigger of the three guys by far.
30 pounds bigger.
Yeah. Yeah. He was, I think it was 6'2", 240 at Iowa. So it would make a whole lot of sense. But we don't know what Hill and Bassa weigh now. But you still have Harrison Taggart, who looked good. You still have Devin Jackson, who still has probably the best linebacker frame on the team. Mm-hmm. Just probably a little bit biased for me because I like the way he plays. But it adds another name to the room, which I think is a good thing. Like Matt said, that's depth at linebacker is not great as of now. And we're still not 100% sure what Justin is capable of now, although it won't matter because the hope is that he's fully healthy by the season or at least by fall camp, because that's when it really matters in how they play. But I think the best thing about this move, if it is a full move, which we'll never really get until, I don't know, probably fall camp.
We'll know by fall.
We'll know by fall, but is what Erik said is that kind of clears up the safety room just a little bit more. There's still probably too many chefs in the kitchen. But, with Tysheem Johnson and Evan Williams coming in, that's a good start. You still have Steve Stevens. You still have Brian Addison. You have the potential development of Trajan Williams. You have other guys who could step up into that role because safety is a relatively easy position to transition to. There are a bunch of cornerbacks who are sitting there in that room who might not see the light of day, who might need to make a transition over there to safety, but I think the depth there is going to be just fine. I think it helps with if Hill does move over. I think that really helps that position group out. And for linebacker, I mean, with how poor the linebacker play was last season, I'm down to try whatever.
Why not?
Yeah. I mean, doesn't matter. But Tatum Tuioti, who I really thought looked more physically impressive as a linebacker than an outside linebacker, was a guy I was like, I wonder where he's going to play. But he's going to be outside linebacker for sure, especially a guy at his height. But
sorry, this just dawned on me. Tatum physically resembles Jackson LeDuc a little bit. When you said inside linebacker, I thought of it.
Very similar.
Frame and the hair color and complexion. There are some similarities there.
Very similar. Although the issue with Jackson was that he wasn't quick enough to move around the perimeter. So again, Oregon last year.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say last year they had a lot of guys who could stop the run, which is great. But you also need other guys who can, drop back into coverage, which is how literally everything in football is nowadays. Even the Big Ten, those guys are throwing the football some. So if Jamal Hill can transition to linebacker and stop the run and cover, great. That's a really, really positive plus for Oregon, but we still have plenty of time to figure that out.
Just to go back to the Tatum comparison, I thought he reminded me a lot just from a physical standpoint of Trevor Maai.
Earlier Trevin,
yes,
a couple years ago before he got 280. Yeah, I can see that.
when he first showed up, very similar body, long, but they've got good size and very athletic. I don't know if it's because he's a Eugene kid that has been in Eugene for all of 1 year, or what, but I just think, I keep going back to what Huffman said, that if he had a different last name, the excitement around him would be a lot bigger. Just because, people just look at him thinking, oh, well, he's on the team because his dad, and Huffman continues to praise him. And I just think they may have got something. It's one practice. We saw 18 minutes. I didn't watch all 18 minutes of Tatum.
How much did you actually even watch him do stuff? Probably a total of 2 minutes.
Right, but he just looks the part. And sometimes those guys show up and they just click. But I don't know. We'll see. We'll see if that is. But Erik, I think you asked Dan how you operate with quarterbacks, and in particular with Bo, because we talked about this too on Wednesday. What do you do with Bo? Because it's coming off an injury. There's a new quarterback, but he's also kind of established as the starter. How do you handle his reps? Because you don't want to overwork him. You don't want to get him hurt, but he also needs to get himself ready.
Yeah, no, I think it's really interesting because, we've seen different staffs have very different approaches. I remember how few snaps CJ Verdell took. I think it was maybe it was his final spring, but it was is he even really practicing? Well, I think it was notable that Dan said, it is a tough balance. They want to be conscientious and work with the medical staff to protect him. But I think, as he said a couple of times, you don't get better at football by not playing football. I think that's pretty close to an exact quote. And for Bo, he's a competitive guy and he wants to be out there taking part. And again, we watched 18 minutes of practice. For the quarterbacks, it was basically warm up and then stumble bum where they're just protecting the football while other players try to whack at it. That's the equivalent of what they did for the time we watched. So I can't really say oh, it looked like Bo was a full participant, or, oh, Bo didn't. I really don't have a great feel. But Dan made it clear they're going to be very careful with reps, but I also get a sense from what Dan said that they want to make sure that he gets a full spring where it feels like he has an opportunity to get better, because even though he's a fifth-year quarterback, there's opportunity to improve. And obviously that's going to be a focal point with a new position coach. So, yeah, I did think that part was notable. I also thought it was kind of notable, some of the things he had to say about Novosad, just about kind of liking some of the early impressions, but also noting that he needs to do a better job with ball placement. Dan didn't say it, but I did hear from somebody that there were quite a few interceptions thrown in practice based upon Dan's quote. Kind of makes you wonder if the true freshman had a couple of those welcome to college moments day one, which are very much understandable. But yeah, no, it was interesting seeing him, because you want to talk about just the difference between Novosad and this is one of the things I thought really stood out, and Ty Thompson. I know they're 3 years apart, but physically these are different, just very different. I mean, Ty Thompson physically, he looks like he could be playing outside linebacker for Oregon. Truly, he's just a very, very well put together kid. Whereas Austin Novosad, you can tell he needs some time in the weight room. And you watch Austin throw the football, super quick release. I think it looks like he's got a lot of zip on it. You watch Ty throw a football, it's just a cannon of an arm. And one of my favorite things, because again, we're kind of limiting what we do in practice, is just watching Ty Thompson throw the ball deep, in long toss, because the guy can absolutely fling it. And I think I've said it before, flat foot, he can throw it 60 yards. So
he's got a howitzer, man.
They are very different, and I will be very curious to see. I know we're getting a year ahead, but when this does become a Thompson, Novosad, QBX, QBY, whoever else is with them, it'll be very interesting to see how that develops, because you look at them and think physically they're very different, but you kind of wonder how an offense might change depending upon which one of them is at quarterback. Again, I'm probably way too down the line. It's first day of practice, but these are the kind of things I was taking in, watching it, thinking about the bigger picture at quarterback, because we know the situation for starter this year. So that takes out that element. We know it's going to be Bo, but what we don't know is what's going on behind him. And just comparing the two, there's a way more things that are contrasting than that are comparable between them, is what I would say.
Yeah, I unfortunately didn't get to watch any of the quarterbacks. I will say that Austin Novosad is wearing number 16 this year, so buy your Austin Novosad jerseys now. And physically, he just reminds me a lot of what Jay Butterfield came as a true freshman. Like the same dudes.
Yeah,
like 6'6".
But yeah, I see what you're saying.
I don't know what Novosad is. He's probably like 6'4", 6'5".
I think he was listed at 6'3" coming in as a high school kid. I'm going to pull that up.
Short boy.
I thought he was 6'4".
Yeah, shorter than Jay, but probably 198, 210 pounds soaking wet. Just guys who need to have some weight room experience, and until they get on a meal plan, it's just going to be hard for them to jump into a game and be physically ready for college football. If he did throw some interceptions, it is what it is. Like, first day of spring, first time against defense, or like a real collegiate defense. I'm sure that was probably a mildly scary experience, because the speed of the game is so much different from high school to college. So I mean, again, way too early overreactions for all of these things. So and I warned the podcast listeners on Wednesday to expect something like this for all of our giddiness from post spring practice.
Well,
so
I push back a little bit, because I don't think I'm overreacting. I'm just trying to lay the groundwork for what I see.
I'm not saying you're overreacting. I'm just saying I just couldn't find a better word other than to use overreactions. But maybe just reactions, just giddy reactions coming from the first fall or first spring camp day here. So,
anything else that you guys have from your notebooks that didn't make a story that needs to?
I think there's quite a few things. And unfortunately, the thing I'd like to talk about is a thing that wasn't during the periods we were supposed to be watching. So we saw some stuff that we can't talk about, which kind of stinks, because I think it's really potentially interesting. But some of the offensive line stuff we saw was kind of interesting during the period after. But we can't talk about that, because that's not in a period we're supposed to be watching, and I don't want to get in trouble. But I will be patiently awaiting the first time, I should say, that we get to officially watch them line up as an offensive line unit, and seeing if the group that was out there with the first group is what we see next. Because if it is, it would surprise a lot of people. So I think that was kind of the thing. As I'm walking, and Zach Neal and I kind of saw it take place out of the corner of our eye, and are writing down the numbers, kind of going like, if that's what this is, if that's how they're going to do this, Erik Terry is either a mad scientist, because this doesn't compute with what I expected, or this is just, again, day one overreactions, and they're just messing around. Not everybody's healthy, and people are in different spots. But again, I know that's a little bit of a tease, because I'm not telling you all of it, but I just wanted to kind of maybe it is a good thing to tease, because the next time they go through, we can officially talk about it. Maybe it'll be something that is kind of worth piquing your interest early on about.
Yeah, I was going to say we can't talk about that, but what we can talk about is all my weird notebook things that I had written down. For all those wondering, Will Stein is a hat guy, unfortunately. Wore a hat the first day of practice, so we're going to have to mark that down in the books. Erik Terry, non-hat guy, just a straight hair dude, so I thought that was interesting. It was pretty sunny, but it was also frigid, like Matt said, to open the podcast. Felt like a cold November morning in the middle of March, so I was okay with that.
Jared,
numbers.
Jared, what was Chris Hampton? Was that a hat? Was he a beanie guy? I couldn't tell. I didn't.
I honestly did not see Hampton.
Okay.
Just never saw him. So I don't know. I'll have my eyes open on Saturday.
Fair enough.
Hampton. I can't remember if Hampton was wearing a beanie or not, but he is a glasses guy.
Ooh.
Oh, yeah, big glasses.
He had sunglasses on.
Oh, okay. Well, it was bright.
You couldn't see like a good chunk of his face.
That's okay. That's what sunglasses are there for. I just wanted to go through a couple numbers real quick. Just some ones that kind of stuck out to me. Jordan Birch will be wearing 1, Justin Jacobs at 4, Trayshawn Holden 5, Kyrie Jackson at 15, Tez Johnson at 15 as well. Just guys who I think could get in to the game. Luke Dunn at number 45, Johnny Cornelius 65, and then from guys previously on the team who are now changing their numbers, got a couple of them. Jeffrey Basta is now wearing number 2, which. Yeah. I'll stay quiet. Jamal Hill is changing from 19 to number 9, so getting rid of a 1 there. I like that. And then our dear friend Luke Basso going from 57 to 43. I thought that was really, really important because I didn't recognize Luke without the number 57. So when he started to line up for long snaps, I just didn't recognize him. So now we'll recognize everybody on this official roster by Saturday. I expect both of you guys to have it fully memorized. There will be a test. I thought it was interesting. This is probably going to be my last random thing from the day. I did think it was interesting that Dan post-practice shouted out Josh Connolly Jr. for being one of the guys who was a leader. I thought that was a big thing to hear. Usually what Dan says around this time doesn't have a lot like behind it. It's kind of just coach speak. I thought the Jamal Hill thing was another big, interesting one, but I thought the Connolly one was one where he genuinely shouted out a guy. And usually when you ask Dan, it's like, hey, who's stepping up? Who's a guy who, has really performed well? He's like, oh, well, everybody has. It's a very prototypical coach answer. And sometimes he'll give specifics, and I always think it's important to memorize who those specific people are. So Connolly gets a shout out for being a leader, being a vocal guy, being someone who puts all of his energy into stretching or whatever Dan said. And so I thought that was an interesting thing to take away from today. And overall, I thought Connolly looked good on the offensive line. And physically, I thought he was imposing and one of the bigger bodies on that front. So I think that's it from my notebook. I don't know if I have anything else.
To add on to that, Dan did single out Josh, but he also mentioned 3 other veteran guys that I just thought were notable in terms of he was asked specifically about leaders because he said some players were developing that in his opening. He also mentioned Jamal Hill, Jeff Bassa, and Bo Nix as 3 older players who've kind of taken development or he's seen quality leadership traits from. So I agree with Jared. I don't want to take a ton away from it, but I will certainly kind of pack that away and remember, okay, these are the guys that day one of spring Dan is kind of saying, these are some of the people we think are going to be team leaders. And I agree with your general sentiment that maybe it's just coach speak, but I also think from a kind of pulling certain levers perspective, Dan is I think very clearly trying to identify who he wants leaders to be. And it's probably, I'm sure he's had conversations behind closed doors, but to publicly point those guys out, I don't think that was unintentional either.
Yeah, and Dan's really media savvy. He knows what he's saying up there. And I just think it was important that he threw out the Josh Connolly mention because I think that's like the first time he's really given him any kind of love in a media session other than just saying like, oh yeah, he's here or he's not hurt or he's like practicing, and because he was a true freshman last season. And I don't know, Dan doesn't talk too often about true freshmen other than to say, if you're good enough, you're old enough, even though that was very rarely the case last season. But now that Josh Connolly has moved up to a sophomore, maybe he'll have more opportunities for Dan to shout him out, and it began on day 1. So I was happy to hear it. That certainly piqued my interest. But, like I said earlier, I think that's it. I'm just going through the roster and I got nothing else.
It was very strange seeing Kavanaugh, Oregon's analyst. Kavanaugh, yeah. Sorry. Oregon's analyst or assistant coach for the offensive line be wearing an Oregon uniform, team issued gear. Longtime Mike Riley assistant coach at Nebraska and before that at Oregon State. Dan did single him out as one of the couple analysts that they did hire this past offseason to replace some guys. And I thought it was I think this is why I'm really impressed with Dan and just like the forward thinking that he has, despite being such a young coach, is he was asked about like, hey, you've got 3 new analysts. You've got I cannot say this name.
Kavanaugh.
Kavanaugh. I do not know why. Kavanaugh. I cannot say it. Brian Makulowski and Antonio Parks. He was asked about all 3 of those guys because they replaced some analysts that left. And people would, there's people that would think, oh, well, these guys, why'd they have to leave Oregon? Yada, yada, yada. And he said, when you have turnover from an analyst standpoint and you guys move on for full-time positions, that's something I get really excited for. You want to be at a place where we're not reaching just my goals and aspirations. We're reaching everybody in the organization's goals and aspirations. And that was a very, very smart comment. And I think that often gets lost in translation with a lot of sports, a lot of organizations, what have you. And he singled out the 3 guys that they brought in as, they're all talented. He has, he's really high on Brian because this is like their 4th stop together. He mentioned Antonio Parks as someone that Will Stein raved about, and as Dan called him an up and coming guy. But that was those 3 guys are going to bring experience to groups, especially the offensive line, where we talked about Malik Terry's young, but he also added they're going to try and maybe add more analysts too. But I just thought that was a really interesting comment from Dan, and one that you don't often hear about. Is everyone wants to see the head coach succeed, but he wants truly like the entire staff to succeed as well, and that means getting jobs.
Yeah, I think they're all extensions of him to a certain degree, right? Like you can add them all as part of his early coaching tree to a certain degree. And I know that 1 year, 2 years doesn't equate to that, but the longer he spends time as a head coach, the more he's going to develop that. And I think he's understanding of some sort of legacy he might be leaving, but more than that, just the development and kind of what kind of a relationship he fosters here and how that could benefit both himself and the program. Because the more guys, you talked about this many times, it's a good thing when people come for your coaching set, because that means that they're good at what they do. And the more people that leave, I know it leaves holes, and it's frustrating for fans because they like seeing some level of continuity, but that just sort of adds to what you can accomplish here. Of if you're a bright offensive mind like a Kenny Dillingham, hey, you can come here and become a head coach really quickly. If you're an analyst like some of the guys that took off last year and received full-time position coaching jobs, more analysts are going to come in saying, hey, I got an opportunity to maybe get a full-time coaching job sooner than later. So yeah, no, all of this is kind of layered and works together for the program. And yeah, as Dan, I think eloquently, and probably more eloquently than I can say, you want to root for your guys to succeed. And when they do, that's a really good thing for everybody involved.
Yeah, no, Dan has kind of expressed that sentiment before, where he wants everybody to move on. And, like Erik touched on, it annoys the fan base when guys up and leave after 1 year, but everybody else would do that too. Yeah, it's they got a better job. They are going to get a pay raise. They're going to go do exactly what they want to do. It'd be hard pressed to find anybody who would turn that type of position down. And that it'll happen this offseason after the 2023 season. I guarantee it. I think ultimately you're looking forward to Dan not leaving and continuing to hire these guys who continue to be poached by other teams to be head coaches, offensive line coaches, defensive coordinators, yada, yada, yada. I think I thought it was nice that Dan said that. That's kind of what I expected him to say, just because that's what he's done in press conferences in months past. But to hear it again, it was nice. It was good to talk to Dan again for the first time. But one more thing before we end the pod. Happy St. Patrick's Day to all that celebrate. Also, happy March Madness to all that celebrate.
Unfortunately, Oregon's not celebrating. Unless we want to count the NIT in March Madness, which I'm not in favor of.
No.
It did seem like Oregon fans were celebrating a certain upset, though. Princeton over Arizona seemed to be something Oregon fans are pretty happy about yesterday.
Michigan State.
Which they should not be happy about. Like, I understand you don't like Arizona's fan base, but that hurts the league drastically.
Mm-hmm.
Do we care? Do we care about leagues anymore, though? I mean, is Oregon in the same league as Arizona in 2 years? I don't know. I'm just kind of being facetious. But I have, for small tangent, we can wrap, and maybe it's not even worth having. It's just weird how this last year I've always been in the same boat of Matt, of like, you want the conference to do really well. At this point, I don't know if it really matters for Oregon, because I don't know if this conference is going to be around very long. And if it's not, like, okay, like, it's probably good in the short term that Arizona doesn't get upset in the opening round into a 15 seed, but probably also doesn't really matter too much in the long term either.
Yeah, but it's March.
It is March.
You want that upset. Who do you think Nebraska's fans are rooting for in this Michigan State USC game?
Does Nebraska even care about basketball? Like,
well, those are two future Big Ten members, so I just thought I'd ask.
I think Nebraska's fans are busy tending to the farms and getting ready for football season. I mean, do they care about basketball? But I guess to answer your question, probably they don't care. They probably don't like either one.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Skopil? No.
All right.
I don't really care that much either. I'm not going to pretend like I know what people in the middle of the country in Nebraska are thinking about two schools. I would imagine they would probably have more connection to Michigan State than USC based upon the conference they're in now. But I mean, they don't really have any ties to USC aside from a faint football rivalry from decades past.
We're gonna get a lot of hate from our Nebraska listeners, that's for sure.
Do we have any of those?
If they're a Cornhusker Oregon fan, I think there can be kind of understanding of the reasons why we're not totally dialed into what their opinions are on a March Madness game.
Yeah. All right. That's going to do it for us here on the Odds and Audibles podcast. Thank you for listening to the show. We'll be back Monday with a mailbag. And until then, you've been listening to the Odds and Audibles podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.
Peace.